This is a channel for the childless, not by choice person. And today we are doing a live based on, I think this is part 4 of our book club. And I think this was the book club for May. So I'm a little bit behind because this is more of a dense book. But we're talking about the second half of night 3 in the book, The Courage to Be Disliked. We have been kind of discussing this book as a community for about a month now. And, you know, this is a book that, as I've kind of said in some of the other videos, it's more dense. It's a slower read. It definitely makes you think. I think there's lots of different ways and I think there's lots of different ways in which it can apply to people who are going through something like childlessness. That isn't to say that we have to subscribe or agree with every single thing in the book, but I think it is a good exercise in just considering different ways of thinking, especially if you're somebody who maybe is getting stuck in the grief or getting stuck in the anger related to childlessness. Now, this channel is about childlessness, but I also think it translates to anything in your life in terms that you feel like maybe isn't going well or you feel misunderstood around. So let's dive into it. And I'm going to talk about this just in terms of what the book says, and then I'll try and apply it to kind of childlessness. And then sometimes I also like to just give ideas in the way that I'm toying with it as well. Again, I'm not sure how much of it I definitely subscribe to, but as I've said in other lives, what I really, really like about the premise of this book is that it really emphasizes that you don't have to wait for somebody else to change their way of thinking in order for you to feel better about your situation. So if I think about that in terms of not being a woman of a certain age and not having kids, I don't have to wait for, quote, society to view me in a different way or to have more understanding about women over a certain age who don't have kids, or men. I don't have to wait for them. If I did try and wait for them, I'd be waiting probably a long time. And so the Adlerian psychology of it is I don't have to wait for somebody else in order to change. I don't have to wait for somebody else in order to feel better about my circumstance. I don't have to wait for somebody else in order to engage in making things better. And that, particularly as a therapist, I love that mentality. And so as you read this book, if you think that all the rest of it is kind of a bunch of crap, then this is something that you can take with you. You don't have to wait for others to change. If you're wanting to feel better in your circumstance, you don't have to wait for some family member to change. You don't have to wait for society to change. You don't have to wait for the workplace to change. So here we go. Let's talk about it. Well, we as humans decide our own fate. I think that is part of what the Adlerian psychology talks about, is that you determine how you think about something, how you frame something. And because you have that free will to do that, you then can change your thoughts and change your goals around those things. It really emphasizes in some of the previous chapters. So like a little bit of a quick catch up is, if you're doing something or you're in a circumstance that you just repeatedly aren't liking, it is likely, I'm not saying for sure, but it is likely that you're receiving some type of secondary gain related to that circumstance. So for example, if I have a belief, and I've used this as examples before, if I have a belief that I am single because XYZ, right? I am single because I'm overweight, or I am single because I'm not pretty enough, or I am single because I'm not fun enough. Fill in the blank for whatever that is for you. I have adopted those beliefs in order to kind of keep myself single, because what this book might encourage me to consider is that staying single is actually something I'm trying to achieve because it's serving it's serving me in a different way. For example, maybe I'm really afraid of rejection or abandonment or the hurt that might come with the risk of putting myself out there. So this book would say, you're so risk averse. And that feels like such a painful experience to be rejected that in order to protect myself from that, I have subscribed to these other beliefs that are serving to keep myself single. So it gets a little deep, but overall, that's sort of the theme of the book. So the back end of the third night of the book really talks about separating tasks. It is The Courage to Be Disliked. Again, it's a bit of a deep book, heavy book, but it's also a book that is like 10 million copies in print. So while it's a little bit deeper, it's not a textbook. It's still, you're able to read it. When I talk about this with clients, I kind of talk about reading it in little chunks. Because it definitely gets you thinking. For me, I'll read a sentence and I'm like, what the hell? It's like, am I doing that? Is that what's happening here? So it talks about separating tasks. And when it talks about separating tasks, it talks about that in terms of if you're able to separate tasks, it then gives you more freedom in your life. And what it talks about, or what it means related to that, as I interpret it, is it's not my job to make somebody like me. It's not my job to make somebody recognize my experience. It's not my job to make somebody understand me. And many of us really get stuck in the idea that it's really important to be recognized by others. It's really important to feel liked by others. And that our value and worth comes from those things. And what this book would challenge you on is that's not your problem if other people like you. In fact, if you really focus on the fact that other people like you, you will start living against your values and against your truth in order to get other people to like you, because that becomes your goal. Your goal then isn't to be happy. Your goal isn't to be in your truth. Your goal isn't to feel like you're living your best life. Your goal is to make other people happy. And I will say, when we're talking about like childlessness, for example, I will never be able to do that. If I feel like I have to live my life in a certain way, and I do think a lot of people do, like you have to follow the prescribed or sort of common path that society lays out. I think even now they very much talk about having children, getting married, being in partnership, things like that, as contributing to society. And if you're not doing that, then you're somehow not contributing to society in the way that society needs you to. Then you're living your life based on trying to make those people happy. Now, I'm not saying that that's like intentionally. I'm not even saying that that's like in the forefront of your brain. However, if you're waiting on those people to change, that isn't going to happen, and you'll not never, I don't want to say never, but it's going to be a long haul. And so the idea is, right, like I have to intentionally change my goal. My goal isn't to make those people happy. My goal is to live in my truth and act accordingly. And so separating the task of I need those people to see me, understand me, like me, not think that I'm selfish, for example, not think that I'm less than or less worthy. If I put stock in that, that's going to be a long haul. The idea is that's somebody else's task to work on. That's their problem. That problem isn't the way I probably want to say that, but that's their thing to work on. My task is, how can I make myself happy? How can I live in my truth with the reality that I have? Right? And so I need to separate myself from all of those tasks. My task might be, I want to live a life that feels meaningful and purposeful to me within the way that I'm able to do that. And so that's my task. And focusing on that is my task. What the book might say is that that gives me so much more freedom. Okay. Okay. Sorry, I had a phone call come in. So, and I've never had that happen on a live before. Of course, it was spam. You know, like a purposeless phone call. But to get back to that, yeah. So I need to focus on sort of what makes me happy and not worry about making myself palatable for other people, right? So it's separating the tasks around that. So it says on page 150, when one is tied to the desire for recognition, the interpersonal cards will always stay in the hands of other people. Meaning we will orient ourselves to what other people need from us, want from us, versus ourselves. What do I think about that? What do I think about selfishness? Sorry, John, I'm all sort of pushed back. How do I be as selfish as possible? Well, I think sometimes it's about reframing selfishness, right? And it's not selfish to consider your needs, your boundaries, and what feels the most authentic to you. I do sometimes think the definition of the word selfish gets kind of bastardized, right? Living your life in the way that is about your goals doesn't necessarily mean that you're not also, it doesn't mean that you're being selfish, I guess is how I would sort of talk about that. So it talks, again, a lot about changing your goals and thinking about why you have your current goals and then reframing those. It also talks about sometimes we hold on to beliefs because they are convenient ways of explaining something that isn't happening that we want. So I might hang on to the fact that maybe I feel unseen, misunderstood. I'm not saying that isn't true. And this is where I sometimes flip back and forth in terms of how much I subscribe to the book. It doesn't mean that you're not impacted by these things or you're not influenced by these things. But what it means is that you can change your goal that is more aligned with you being happy versus aligned with staying in a negative space. And again, this is things that people work on their whole life around. This is where sometimes I think it can get a little, like if you choose to look at this from the side, from the vantage point of self-blame, I think you probably could if you wanted to. Adler would say, what goal is that serving you though? Right? They would challenge that because ultimately you can also look at this through the lens of I have the power and I don't have to wait on other people in order to live a more authentic life for me. I seem very angry at life. Oh, thanks, John. And along with separating the tasks, it really then starts to go into the title of the book. Like when you're able to separate from other people's tasks, then it generally will indicate that you are you have the freedom, right, that to stop kind of getting stuck in the interpersonal relationship or the impact of other people. So when you're able to separate from that, what it really then talks about is that that takes a lot of courage to be able to do that. And when you are able to do that, the courage of being disliked then brings you closer to freedom. Because now I'm going to worry about what I want in life. I'm going to worry about my goals, the things that will help fulfill me, instead of worrying about being recognized, being disliked, and making other people feel a certain way. It doesn't sound like you agree with Adler, John. I would encourage you to read the book. It definitely will get people thinking in different directions. Again, I think this is something that we talk a lot about in society. It's like not your job to make other people like you, but yet we generally fall into the trap of wanting it to be our job because of the way that makes us feel in the short term, but it's an impossible task to kind of have everybody like you. If everybody's liking you, you're likely tying yourself into knots in order to make that happen, which can then lead to a lot of low mood, misalignment. When we're living in misalignment with our values, that's when things can feel really disorienting, uncomfortable, lonely, unseen. The book is The Courage to Be Disliked. It's a good book. It definitely makes you think. And, there's things that you might agree with it and things that you don't agree. That's where I land on it anyway. And so it says here, there may be a person who does not think well of you, but that is not your task. And I think when we are feeling unseen, heard, again, if I'm talking about some of the things that some of the beliefs, attitudes that get projected onto people who don't have kids, who are childless. This is for Childless Not By Choice. That is not my task. And I do think I spent some time really taking that on as my task. One, that I had to change the situation. I had to defend this situation. And I do feel like as I got closer to acceptance, and I feel a little bit more, peace might not be the right word, but a little more stable might not be the right word, as I feel differently or a little bit ready to move forward in it. I do feel like part of the reason is because I stopped worrying about all of that. I started to separate myself from those tasks. That's hard. And it isn't a task that you complete and then never go back to again. What I heard and believe is that we are the most magnetic when we focus on ourselves. We should make ourselves priority, choose ourselves. So, I think the Adler kind of psychology emphasizes that. And in the book, the youth in the book actually pushes back on that, in that it pushes back on how some people may hear that. And I'm not saying this is what you're saying, and I'm not saying it is or it isn't, but meaning part of life is community. Part of life is mutual relationship. Part of relationship is kind of considering what other people think, considering how you're impacting other people. And we think about these things too much as one way or the other. And maybe there's a way to blend the two, where I can have awareness, I can be thinking about other people in my life, but ultimately, for me to show up in the best possible way in those relationships, it's to make sure that I'm also taking care of myself. So to your point, this is kind of a cliche, maybe overly simplistic way to talk about it, but it is the old saying, right? When you get on an airplane, you have to put your oxygen mask on first before you help the person next to you. Even if the person next to you is really vulnerable and a child, you have to put your oxygen mask on first. And so that's kind of choosing yourself in the moment, but it doesn't mean you're not then contributing and engaging in a give and take aspect of society. It just means that you're able to then be available to other people, engage in a more authentic relationship versus entering into a relation. I am getting a little, I'm like listening to myself and I am getting a little like this. uh, you're able to engage in that relationship in a way in which you're not focusing on the goal being I need this person to like me. Instead, you're focusing on the goal of how can we be in a mutual relationship together. What is the end point? To what extent do we disregard them and what others think of us? After all, we live in a society that rightfully or not judges us. Yeah, I hopefully I spoke to that a little bit in that, and that is the give and take between the dynamic and the dialogue in the book. Is I think if you look at this from the Adler psychology perspective, like the purest of it is, listen, in order for you to show up to be mutually give and take in a relationship, um, you do have to put yourself first. Now, I think a counterpoint to that could be sometimes society uses judgment and order and shame in order to reduce negative behaviors that are not helpful to society, right? And I think, when we talk about laws or we talk about like shame or consequences or judgment around like criminal activity, things like that, like we might say, oh, yeah, we like it in that situation, but maybe not in this other situation. So it may not all be one or the other. But I do think if I'm thinking about it from like an individual perspective, I actually think our greatest risk and not risk, I think our greatest, one of the things that I think could be the hardest for the human experience is thinking, well, what are my tasks? What are the things that I want to own, and separating ourselves from others? Our potential and life opportunities stem from other people's perception of you to an extent. So, and you, John, you need to read this book, John, because the counterpoint in the book really does talk about that. Like, you can't just pluck this out of society. And what Adler would say to that is subscribing to that belief. And I'm not saying this is you. I want to be really clear. What Adler would say to this is subscribing to the belief that our potential in life and our opportunities stem from other people's perceptions of us is serving you in some way, right? And for a person, believing that might mean, oh, that way, if I am not succeeding in a certain way, I can then blame it on the fact that it's due to other people versus myself. I'm not saying that's you, but what I'm saying is that's what Adler would say, is you holding on to that belief is serving you, and possibly it serves you or the person because it explains why maybe somebody isn't where they want to be in life. And that feels easier to somebody to integrate or accept than, oh, I failed at something or I wasn't able to do something. I know it gets deep. But again, this is where we were in this book. We really talked about the separation of tasks, separating tasks, and then leaned into when you're able to do that. That takes a ton of courage to do that because you're going to be disliked. You're not going to make everybody happy. But when you're able to do that, then it creates freedom. That's the word that they use in the book, is freedom. And when you have freedom, then it opens the door for you now to start to fill your life up with the things to make you happy, or to make you more in line with living your life according to what you want and your goals. And that's where the end, night 3 ended. So, where am I going here? Okay. The 4th night is called Where the Center of the World Is. And so we will come back to this. And the way that I've been doing this is I've been splitting each night up into 2 different lives because of the density of it. As somebody who's like hosting the live, it's kind of hard to regurgitate it and talk about it and then pull examples from it. And I want to make sure that I do that in a way that feels pretty thoughtful and thought out. So that's why I'm splitting them up. But that's the 4th night. And then the 5th night is to live in the earnest and the here and now. So get the book if you like talking about this kind of stuff. And I know again, this is also one of those books where you can read this book while you're reading another book because you can like read a few pages a day, which I like to do. And then I also talk, this book has my ass thinking. I will tell you that. I've brought this book up in my own therapy before and because I get stuck in my own thoughts. I get stuck in the negative sometimes. I get stuck in why is my life not changing? And while I may not subscribe to everything in this book, I am, maybe it's because I'm like in a time of my life where I am ready to hear the message. I don't have to wait for anybody else. I actually can do this myself, and maybe I need to rethink the way that I believe things. And I know I'm just repeating myself, but and maybe some of my beliefs are rooted in things that were just projected onto me or just messages that I've been given versus truth as I see it. Like and subscribe for viewers. Thanks. I always forget that. So this is, the channel is Sondersisterhood. It is a channel for those who are single and childless, not by choice. And I also like to do book clubs and, spread out the things that we talk about a little bit and then kind of apply it back to that topic. But thank you all for joining on a Saturday night. I think I am going to, at least it's Saturday night where I am. What do I think about the let it go theory? And I don't know. I know that Mel has that book out. Everyone's talking about it. My personal trainer has even asked me about it. I have not had the time to dive into that yet. And maybe that should be one of our book clubs or our next book clubs. And I need to look into it more. I just haven't had the time to do that. What I've been seeing on the outside is that some people love it and some people are like, yeah, I don't know that. I'd love to know what you think about it. And I don't know that you want to post it on a live, but if you do, great. If not, reach out to me. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And really, I know you're somebody who comes to the lives often and participates and is on the channel. So I really appreciate your support. Very few YouTube lives deliver this sort of quality discussion. Thank you. I think we have the book, The Courage to Be Disliked, to thank for that as well. I feel so free by practicing it, very liberating. Oh, so maybe it is similar to the idea of separating tasks. Maybe the let it go is let those tasks go. That's somebody else. Adler, I'm on my phone. I don't know when Adler was. I think he's in the same generation as Freud in terms of psychology. And so maybe Mel Robbins is borrowing from him a little bit. But I love that you found something that feels so liberating. I also, one of the things, like, for example, like this book is very dense and has a lot of explaining and things like that. Whereas I think sometimes when some of these concepts get rebranded, they get rebranded in a way that has like a short, quippy sort of mantra. And let it go, I think, does that. because I can be in a scenario in my head ruminating on something and I can just say, let it go, right? And it can be really helpful. Um, so this is, hi Alexa, it's nice to see you. This is a channel that is specific. The niche is for people who are single and are childless, not by choice. That is me. And my goal around this channel is to show a different perspective, kind of validate the grief, the difficultness that comes along with that, but also that you can live a life that's meaningful, purposeful, and fun, even despite going through something really hard that you, at least with the childless, not by choice piece, that you can't change. And so I like to think of this as a community. I like to think of this as a community in which we can um, understand that there's difficult parts about this, and we can understand that it's an we have opportunity ahead of us and that we can support each other, but we can also show up in our community, contribute to our community and to each other in ways that feel authentic, despite the fact that this aspect of our life didn't happen. And yeah, you know what's interesting? Now I'm starting to just kind of talk to talk. So I'm coming off the book now, but I also find that the channel has a lot, not a lot, but also has people who are like empty nesters, where they spent so much of their life really identifying in that particular way as a parent. As listen, if you're a parent, I'm sure that is sort of one of the main pieces in your life. I completely understand that. And when somebody isn't becomes an empty nester, their life very much changes. What I am told, again, I'm not a parent, so I can't say this from experience, that your things change, right? Like it's a transition. Your daily sort of mindset is different. Not mindset, like your daily purpose, for lack of a better word, is sort of different on the daily, in that that's a really hard, your identity that's been wrapped up as a parent for so long is now shifting, right? And people kind of find the channel helpful in that, because ultimately it's really about, we all have these labels and identities, and we all can't always call ourselves like the identity that we want to, but that doesn't mean that life has to suck. Still flushing through that a little bit. The loss I experienced has made me hesitant to open myself up to love again. Yes. You are not alone in that. For example, I will share here a little bit. I use that the singleness example of believing false beliefs as to why I'm single. And I think I do that because I went through something that was extremely hurtful, and I decided I would never put myself in that situation again, thinking I am self-protecting myself, which I am. The problem is I've sort of like gone overboard in it, where now I have decided that I won't take a risk, that maybe I can be in a partnership. Not that I haven't had like partnerships or situationships and relationships even and things like that, right? But, I keep it at a distance. And so that's not an uncommon way that we go about protecting ourselves, right? And so that's you coping, the brain. I don't want to subscribe anything to you. For some people, it could be that's the brain's way of coping. Like, I am going to protect myself. And sometimes we can protect ourselves from everything. It's very hard to only protect yourself from the hurt, right? It's like you're throwing a blanket over everything, but sometimes you're also throwing a blanket over the good. I don't say that to minimize or oversimplify, or even say that that's not, or even to say that that's wrong. I'm saying it more from experience, as somebody who went through a divorce 20 years ago. And, you know, still trying to protect myself from kind of going through that again. But I've probably protected myself from the possibility of other things as well. Thanks for showing up, though. Thanks for checking in on the channel. All right, so I think I'm going to close tonight. I took Gavin, who's my Great Dane, if you're new to this channel. I took him to daycare today, and he is just spending the evening. Oh, hey, Gav. Hey. Oh, goodness. So he's just spending the evening. And I will look at the Let It Go theory by Mel Robbins. You won't be surprised to hear that my algorithm brings that to me quite a lot, just in the line of work that I'm in. Thank you for the awesome discussion and for the challenging aspects as well. And I will see you for night 4. I have a really heavy week of work coming up, so it'll probably be next weekend before I get to it. Good to see everybody, and happy Saturday or Sunday, wherever you are in the world.